Hi, welcome to Dargon Gaming Squad. I'm Chris, aka CJ, and this is the first episode of Player Perspective. A few weeks ago, December 23rd in fact, I did my first ever Periscope, and it was snowing here in the foothills where I live, and I talked a little bit about the player perspective of dealing with weather events. I thought that I had correctly set everything up so that I could share it to YouTube later, and kind of promised in that broadcast that that's what I would do, and unfortunately I apparently didn't set it up correctly and I lost that video. I discovered when I replayed it as well that a chunk of it got cut off. I must have lost my connection, so I decided to kind of revisit that, and I had a couple things I wanted to add on and build on anyway. So I'm not going to rehash everything, but the bottom line of that video was I feel that as players we have a responsibility to work with what our GMs give us. Yeah, it is the GM's responsibility to give us something to work with. They need to decide what's going on in the world, they need to tell us, they need to explain it, and if they want it to have an impact, they need to describe it in a way that gives us something to work with, sure. But it's also our responsibility to bring what they give us to life. And what I'm suggesting here is not something that we need to do in every single role-playing opportunity or moment, but we can pick and choose them and maybe really add to the immersion and add to the experience of the game for everybody at the table. In regards to weather, specifically snowy weather, and I'm sorry, it's really windy here and the lights have been kind of flickering, so hopefully the power won't go out on us. Won't affect the camera, but it may affect the light, so if it does, just please bear with me. Anyway, dealing with weather, specifically snowy weather, what I had talked about in that video was, that you need to have a clue about where your character's from. Whether your character is from a climate that is used to dealing with snowy weather, winter conditions, or not. In our game that Nate is running for us, we have a character who's from the south. If anybody has seen Merij Kris play, she is a fabulous role player, and she has really done a good job of bringing this point home with her character. Her character, we're in a northern climate, it's starting to get cold. We've had some cold weather, and she has reacted in very, very small ways, but they've been very, very impactful. So I think those are things that are really great. So that was basically what I covered in the original video. One of the things I had wanted to expand on and what got cut out of the video is talking about finding shelter. So I think that for a lot of us, we assume if you're in a forest, for instance, that you're going to be protected from the snow. But the truth is that it really depends on the type of the forest. So I hope that I can get outside. It's so windy I won't be going out right now because there are trees coming down and it's fairly dangerous, but I hope I can get some footage to include in this video. But we live in, again, the foothills of Washington State. We live on land that was logged about 75 years ago. And what happens is in that logging process, they did a lot of clear cutting, which means they cut all the trees down, all of the trees that were of any value. They took all of them out, and it leaves the land very barren. But it also means that as it comes back, it may come back denser than in some areas, or you may see an abundance of deciduous trees and different things. So what we often see here in the Pacific Northwest are patches of deciduous trees. Alders are very, very common, maples, wild cherry, mountain ash. So those trees, of course, they lose their leaves in the winter, and that means there is no cover or protection underneath them. We also see patches of course, evergreen trees, but it seems that maybe the hemlock trees may take a little more easily than some of the, or maybe more prolifically than some of your bigger trees like your Douglas firs and your Sitka spruce and your noble firs and your cedar trees that really create a dense canopy. Hemlock trees tend to have little tiny needles on them, and the branches aren't as full and dense, and they just don't create that canopy. So what I noticed outside was we had a spot where the right up next to this hemlock tree was snow on the ground. So those little fine tiny needles had allowed snow to get through. And then if you go into an area where there's some old growth, which we also have here on our property, then you get that really dense, complete canopy that really protects things. So if you're in a forest in your game, that's something you need to think about. Hopefully the GM will be describing kind of what kind of forest you're in and give you a description of what might be there. Also thinking about old growth forests, you may have downed logs that you can take shelter around or in, or trees that have maybe have hollow places in them, thinking of like the redwood forest and stuff where you see things. My character in Nate's game comes from a village of hobbits that create their homes in the bases of the trees, amongst the roots and the cavities if there is one, and build their homes right into that with the trees above them. So that would make sense. That would be a natural place for them to look for. You may also, I have this vision in my head of Lord of the Rings when Frodo and his friends are first leaving the Shire and they're being chased by the ring wraith. And they hide in the roots of that huge tree. So sometimes you will have changes in elevation. That might be a place where you could build a shelter. Thinking about what if you're not in the trees? Maybe you're in an area where there's really deep snow. You're high up in the mountains and the snow is very deep. A friend of mine, a coworker, recently slept in a snow cave, and she showed us pictures. This thing was huge. They had this, huge beds on either side cut into the cave. The snow had to be at least 20 feet deep where they were. There was a little kitchen area. They could actually stand up in this thing. The party could, create and make a shelter and be safe in. And it's surprising how warm they can be. Of course, you have to be still very well geared up. Caves, things like that. So obviously, what I'm saying is you need to take that into consideration, and an opportunity where maybe the GM creates a blizzard or something might give you a really great opportunity to add some flavor with a little bit of knowledge about survival tactics or what there might be in the area. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is travel. How do you get around in snow like this? On foot, you may be able to use snowshoes. You may be able to use cross-country skis depending on the setting that your GM has given you. If you're mounted, something to think about that I think a lot of people, unless you're horse people, you may not know this, is that horses, particularly if they have been shod, meaning they have horseshoes on their hooves, really don't get around in snow that great. It can create a major hazard for them. What happens is that they walk along, the snow balls up under their hooves in the cavity that's made from the shoe. The shoe kind of raises up the level of their hoof. It's kind of like us wearing shoes with soles. And it creates enough of a cavity that the snow just kind of balls up and creates an ice ball that is then very hazardous. So you have to think about, are you going to dismount? Are you going to constantly be checking your horse's hooves with a hoof pick maybe to get the ice out? Are you going into a place that you're maybe going temporarily? Are you based in a village and you're going to be returning to that village on your mission? Can you leave the horses behind? Do you have their shoes removed if they're shod? Or maybe you just dismount and you walk. And then you have to think, of course, about the difficult terrain and how much more work that's going to be and how much energy that's going to take. And it's not an easy thing, too, how you feed your animals if you're traveling in snow, particularly horses that need to graze. So, maybe this is an opportunity to have a polar bear for a mount, or a caribou, or maybe you have a sled a sleigh, and you have excuse me a moment. Okay, well, that was scary. We just had a tree come down on our house. So I guess that's an interesting thing to think about too, with your characters. You know, if you're in the mountains, or a place where it might be windy and there's trees around, or other debris and things, you know, what could be occurring to your characters. That's something, I guess it's more for the GM, but anyway, going back to getting around in the snow, I think that you get the point. You know, you could have sled dogs, you could have you know, a sleigh with some reindeer, caribou, something like that, maybe polar bears. You could maybe have some interesting things going on. So that wraps up our first episode of Player Perspective. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give us the thumbs up and let us know in the comments below. Also, what do you do to bring these kinds of things to life in your games? How can we as players, what are your tips and tricks? Do share those in the comments as well. And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, we'll see you right here on Dargon Gaming Squad. Bye.